Your mind is a battlefield, and you are losing. Not to external enemies, but to the chaos within your own skull. Every thought that arises uninvited, every impulse that derails your intention, every fragment of attention stolen by something trivial, these are not accidents. They are symptoms of an untrained mind, a consciousness that has never learned to govern itself. The ancient Stoics had a word for this condition. They called it being ruled by fantasia, by impressions that flood the mind without permission and dictate behavior without consent. But here is what should disturb you most. How long have you been aware of this problem, and how little have you done to solve it? We live in the age of distraction, but distraction is not new. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent between battles and complained about the same restlessness, the same mental noise that plagues us today. He did not have social media or smartphones, yet his mind still wandered, still generated anxiety about things he could not control, still pulled him away from what mattered. The difference between Marcus and most people today is that he recognized this as the central problem of human existence. He understood that external circumstances were not his enemy, his own untrained attention was. And so he devoted himself to the practice of focus, not as a productivity technique, but as a form of spiritual warfare. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest philosophers, taught that we are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them. This principle extends directly to focus. You believe your inability to concentrate is caused by your environment, too many notifications, too much noise, too many demands. But the Stoic would tell you that you are mistaken. Your environment is certainly hostile to focus, but the real problem is that you have never trained your mind to resist that hostility. You have never built the internal structures that allow you to direct attention deliberately rather than letting it be captured by whatever stimulus is loudest or newest. You are trying to sail a ship without ever learning to hold the rudder steady. Consider what happens in a typical hour of your day. You sit down with a clear intention, to work on something meaningful, to think deeply about a problem, to create rather than consume. Within minutes, your mind has drifted. A thought about an upcoming conversation, a memory of something embarrassing you said 3 years ago, a sudden urge to check your messages, a vague anxiety about the future. None of these thoughts were invited. None of them serve your current purpose. Yet each one fragments your attention, and the cumulative effect is that you spend your hours not in focused engagement, but in a kind of mental fog, present but not really there, busy but not truly productive, exhausted but with nothing substantial to show for your fatigue. The Stoics observed this pattern in themselves and developed a sophisticated understanding of attention that modern psychology is only now beginning to validate. They understood that the mind, left to itself, is naturally chaotic. It generates thoughts constantly, most of them useless, many of them harmful. The untrained mind is like a house with no doors. Every passing stranger can walk in, make demands, leave debris. The trained mind is like a fortress with a single guarded gate. Thoughts still arrive, but they do not enter without examination. They do not settle without permission. This is what the Stoics meant by prosage, continuous attention, the practice of standing guard over your own consciousness. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about the problem of mental dispersal. He described people who lived in fragments, their attention scattered across a dozen trivial concerns, never fully present anywhere. He observed that such people were exhausted not because they worked too hard, but because they never truly rested. Their minds were always elsewhere, worrying about the future, regretting the past, imagining scenarios that would never occur. Even in leisure, they could not be at peace because they had never learned to command their attention. They were slaves to every impulse, every fear, every desire that arose in consciousness. And this slavery, Seneca argued, was the root of human misery. Modern neuroscience has revealed the mechanics of what the Stoics understood intuitively. Your brain has two networks that compete for control. The default mode network activates when you are not focused on anything particular. It generates mind-wandering, self-referential thought, anxiety about past and future. The task-positive network activates when you deliberately direct attention towards something specific. These networks are antagonistic. When one is active, the other is suppressed. Most people spend their lives dominated by the default mode, which means they spend their lives lost in mental noise. The Stoic practices we will explore are essentially methods for strengthening the task-positive network, for training yourself to override the default chaos with deliberate focus. But we must be clear about what focus actually is, because the modern world has distorted this concept. Focus is not about productivity. It is not about grinding through tasks or maximizing output. Focus, in the Stoic sense, is about presence, the capacity to be fully where you are, doing what you are doing, without your mind fragmenting into past regrets or future anxieties. It is about directing your consciousness deliberately rather than having it pulled by every stimulus. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about concentrating like a Roman, like someone standing at attention, ready for orders, he was describing a quality of mind that most people never develop. Not intensity exactly, but steadiness. Not effort, but alignment. The mind pointing in one direction, held there by will rather than scattered by impulse. This capacity is not innate. You were not born with it, and you will not develop it accidentally. Focus must be built the way muscle is built, through consistent, progressive resistance training. And just as physical training requires understanding proper form, developing focus requires understanding how attention actually works. The Stoics were masters of this understanding. They did not rely on willpower alone, though they valued discipline. They relied on frameworks, on mental models that allowed them to redirect attention systematically. They treated focus not as a feeling to conjure, but as a practice to execute regardless of how they felt. The first principle of Stoic focus is this: attention follows judgment. You cannot focus on what you judge to be unimportant, and you cannot ignore what you judge to be urgent. This means that most focus problems are actually judgment problems. You believe that checking your phone is urgent. You believe that your anxiety deserves immediate attention. You believe that the task in front of you is less important than the vague discomfort pulling you away from it. These beliefs, these judgments, direct your attention automatically. If you want to change where your attention goes, you must first change your judgments about what actually matters. Epictetus would tell his students to examine every impression that arose in their minds and ask, "Is this up to me? Does this deserve my attention right now? Does engaging with this thought move me toward my purpose or away from it?" Most impressions failed this test. Most thoughts were revealed as irrelevant, as mental noise that could be dismissed without consequence. But this dismissal required practice. The untrained mind believes every thought is important, every impulse must be followed, every anxiety must be resolved immediately. The trained mind knows better. It knows that most mental content is garbage, and that the power to discard it is the foundation of freedom. The second principle of Stoic focus is compartmentalization of concern. Marcus Aurelius faced the most complex responsibilities imaginable: military campaigns, political intrigues, administrative crises, personal tragedies. Yet he maintained his composure and effectiveness by refusing to let future concerns contaminate present action. When he was in battle, he focused on battle. When he was in court, he focused on justice. When he was alone with his thoughts, he focused on philosophy. He did not allow one domain to bleed into another. This was not avoidance or denial, This was strategic attention management. He knew that human consciousness can only truly focus on one thing at a time, and that trying to hold multiple concerns simultaneously results in effectiveness in none of them. Consider how different this is from the way most people operate. You sit down to work, but your mind is also holding anxiety about a relationship, concern about finances, anticipation of an upcoming event, and a dozen other threads of worry. You believe you are focusing on the task, but you are actually fracturing your attention across multiple domains. The result is that you feel busy and stressed, but produce work that is mediocre at best. You are present physically but absent mentally, and this absence is exhausting because you are expending energy on worries you cannot resolve while neglecting the task you could actually complete. The Stoic solution is brutal in its simplicity, one thing at a time. Not as a suggestion, but as a discipline. When you are working, you work. When you are with people, you are with people. When you are resting, you rest. No bleeding between domains. No mental time travel into past or future. This sounds easy until you try it, and then you discover how little control you actually have over your own mind. The untrained consciousness rebels against this discipline. It insists that you must think about everything all at once, that you must keep all concerns active simultaneously. This insistence is a lie, and recognizing it as such is the beginning of focus. The third principle is the practice of voluntary attention. The Stoics distinguished between pathological attention, where your focus is captured by external stimuli or internal compulsions, and volitional attention, where you deliberately choose what to focus on and sustain that choice through effort. Most people experience almost entirely pathological attention. They focus on whatever is brightest, loudest, newest, or most emotionally charged. Their attention is reactive, pulled by triggers rather than directed by intention. The Stoic trains the opposite capacity, the ability to choose a focused target and hold it even when more stimulating options present themselves. This is where ancient practice and modern science converge beautifully. Research into attention control shows that the capacity for sustained voluntary attention is trainable, but it requires specific practices. You cannot simply will yourself to focus harder. You need methods that gradually strengthen your capacity to direct and sustain attention against distraction. The Stoics developed several such methods, though they would not have described them in scientific terms. They practiced what we might call attention anchoring, selecting a specific object of focus and returning to it repeatedly whenever the mind wandered. For Marcus Aurelius, this anchor was often a philosophical principle. He would hold in mind a specific teaching, the dichotomy of control, the transience of all things, the duty to act with virtue, and use it as a reference point throughout the day. When his attention drifted into anger at someone's incompetence, he would return to the principle. Their actions are not up to me, but my response is. When anxiety about the future arose, he would return to the principle. I cannot control what has not happened. I can only control my current action. The principle served as a lighthouse in fog, a fixed point he could return to whenever he lost his bearings. Seneca practiced something similar with his evening review. Each night, he would examine his day with forensic attention, noting where his focus had been strong and where it had faltered. Where did I waste attention on things outside my control? When did I let emotion derail my judgment? Where did I allow trivial concerns to contaminate important work? This practice was not about self-punishment but about pattern recognition. By examining his attentional failures, he learned to recognize them earlier, to catch himself in the moment of distraction rather than after hours of lost time. Over years, this practice refined his capacity for real-time attention management. The fourth principle is the elimination of false urgency. The Stoics understood that most of what feels urgent is not actually important, and most of what is important rarely feels urgent. Your mind will tell you that you must check that notification right now, must resolve that social concern immediately, must know what is happening in the news this instant. These impulses feel urgent because they trigger anxiety, and anxiety creates a false sense of priority. But the Stoic asks a different question. If I do not attend to this right now, what actually happens? In most cases, the answer is nothing of consequence. The email can wait. The news will still be there. The social drama will resolve without your involvement. By ruthlessly interrogating urgency, the Stoic creates attentional space for what genuinely matters. This requires courage because it means accepting uncertainty and discomfort. When you choose not to check your messages, your mind generates anxiety. What if something important is happening? What if someone needs you? What if you are missing out? The untrained mind cannot tolerate this anxiety and surrenders immediately. The trained mind recognizes it as false urgency, breathes through the discomfort, and maintains focus on the chosen task. Over time, this practice weakens the grip of false urgency. Your nervous system learns that you can ignore most impulses without consequence, and the impulses gradually lose their power. The fifth principle is environmental design for attention. The Stoics were not naive about the power of environment to shape behavior. Epictetus advised his students to choose their companions carefully because the people you surround yourself with shape your thoughts and values. Seneca withdrew from the noise of Rome when he needed to focus on philosophy. Marcus Aurelius created rituals of solitude even in the chaos of military campaigns. They understood that willpower alone is insufficient against a hostile environment. You must design your circumstances to support your intentions. In modern terms, this means creating what we might call attention architecture. Your physical space should not require constant willpower to maintain focus. It should make focus the path of least resistance. Remove the phone from your workspace. Close unnecessary programs. Eliminate visual clutter. Create physical separation between focus work and leisure activities. These may seem like small adjustments, but they compound dramatically. When every time you look up from your work you see a distraction, you are burning willpower constantly. When your environment contains only your work and nothing else, focus becomes significantly easier to sustain. The sixth principle is the practice of attentional recovery. The Stoics did not believe you could maintain perfect focus indefinitely. They understood that attention is a finite resource that depletes with use and requires restoration. But they were strategic about recovery. They did not recover by switching to different distractions, checking messages, scrolling feeds, consuming content. They recovered through genuine rest, walking, observing nature, sitting in silence, light physical activity. These practices restore attentional capacity because they do not demand focus. They allow the mind to settle without stimulating it with new information. Modern research on attention restoration theory confirms this ancient wisdom. Your focused attention system can be depleted, but it recovers not through different stimulation, but through what researchers call soft fascination, engaging with environments that capture attention effortlessly without demanding directed focus. Natural settings are particularly effective at this, which is why the Stoics valued walking in gardens or observing the stars. These activities rest the directed attention system while preventing the mind from falling into anxious rumination. They create a middle state between focus and distraction, a space where the nervous system can recalibrate. The seventh principle is the acceptance of mental noise. This may seem to contradict everything we have discussed, but it is actually the foundation of all the other principles. The Stoics did not believe you could stop thoughts from arising. They knew that the mind generates noise constantly. This is its nature. The untrained person believes they must eliminate all mental noise before they can focus, and because this is impossible, they never truly focus. They wait for their mind to be quiet, and it never is. The trained person understands that focus is not the absence of mental noise, but the capacity to let it be there without following it. Epictetus taught this through the metaphor of impressions passing through consciousness like travelers through a marketplace. You cannot prevent travelers from entering, but you can choose whether to engage with them. A thought arises, an anxiety, a distraction, a memory. The untrained mind immediately engages, follows the thought, gets lost in it. The trained mind notices the thought, recognizes it as mental noise, and returns attention to the chosen focus. The thought does not disappear, but it is no longer in control. It becomes background noise rather than foreground obsession. This practice requires developing what the Stoics called the observing self, the part of consciousness that can witness thoughts without identifying with them. When you notice you are distracted, there is a moment of clarity. Something in you recognizes that you have wandered from your focus. This witnessing capacity is the key to everything. Most people never develop it because they are so identified with their thoughts that they cannot see them as objects separate from themselves. The Stoic trains this capacity deliberately, learning to step back from mental content and observe it the way you might observe clouds passing through the sky. Modern mindfulness research has extensively validated this practice. Studies show that metacognitive awareness, the capacity to observe your own thoughts, is one of the strongest predictors of sustained attention and emotional regulation. People who can notice when their minds have wandered recover focus faster than people who are lost in distraction without realizing it. This seems obvious once stated, but it represents a profound shift in how you relate to your inner experience. Instead of being your thoughts, you become the space in which thoughts occur. Instead of being controlled by mental noise, you witness it without attachment. The eighth principle is the cultivation of purpose clarity. The Stoics believed that focus problems are often purpose problems. If you do not have a clear sense of what you are trying to accomplish and why it matters, your mind will not commit fully to any task. It will always be looking elsewhere, seeking something more meaningful or more urgent. But when you have profound clarity about your purpose, what you value, what you are working toward, why it matters, focus becomes dramatically easier. You are not forcing yourself to concentrate through sheer willpower. You are naturally drawn toward your purpose because it is genuinely important to you. Marcus Aurelius returned constantly to questions of purpose. What am I here to do? What is my duty as a rational being? What contribution can I make that is worthy of my brief time alive? These questions clarified his focus. When he was tempted to waste time on trivial matters, he reminded himself of his larger purpose. When he was frustrated by obstacles, he reframed them as opportunities to practice virtue, which was his ultimate purpose. This sense of purpose did not eliminate distraction, but it provided a gravitational center that pulled him back when he drifted. You must do this work for yourself. No one can give you purpose. No productivity system can substitute for it. You must sit with the hard questions. What am I building with my time? What would I regret not doing? What do I value so deeply that focusing on it does not feel like sacrifice? These questions are uncomfortable because they reveal how much of your current activity is not aligned with what you actually care about. But this discomfort is necessary. Until you have clarity about what deserves your attention, you will remain scattered across a dozen pursuits that do not matter. The ninth principle is the practice of present moment anchoring. The Stoics understood that the past and future are where attention goes to die. You cannot focus on the present task if your mind is relitigating yesterday or rehearsing tomorrow. The past is fixed and cannot be changed. The future is uncertain and cannot be controlled. The only place where your agency actually exists is right now, in this moment, with this task. Yet most people spend almost no time truly present. They are always somewhere else mentally, and this displacement is the root of both their suffering and their ineffectiveness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you could cut away anxiety by limiting yourself to the present moment. Not as a technique for feeling better, but as a statement of reality. Right now, in this instant, you are likely fine. The problems you are worried about are not actually happening. The catastrophes you are imagining have not occurred. There is only this breath, this task, this moment. When you can anchor yourself here, focus becomes natural because there is nothing else competing for attention. The present moment contains only what is actually in front of you. It is past and future that contain infinite distraction. This practice requires constant vigilance. Your mind will flee the present moment within seconds if you do not hold it there deliberately. A thought about later today arises. A memory from earlier surfaces. A worry about next week interrupts. Each time this happens, you must notice it and return. Not violently, not with frustration, but with patience. The mind is like a puppy that wanders constantly. You would not punish a puppy for wandering. You would gently but firmly guide it back. Treat your attention the same way. When it wanders, which it will thousands of times, simply return it to the present without drama or self-criticism. The 10th principle is the integration of focused action with philosophical reflection. The Stoics did not separate action and contemplation. They understood that genuine focus requires both doing and thinking, both execution and examination. You focus on a task, then you reflect on how that focus was maintained or lost. You work, then you think about your work. This cycle of action and reflection is what allows focus to deepen over time. Without reflection, you simply repeat the same attentional patterns. With reflection, you identify what worked and what did not, and you adjust accordingly. Seneca's evening examination was this practice formalized. He would ask himself, where was my focus today? When did I maintain it well? When did I lose it? What patterns do I notice? What can I learn? This was not self-flagellation. It was strategic analysis. By examining his attentional performance daily, he developed a sophisticated understanding of his own mind. He learned which types of tasks were easiest to focus on, which times of day his concentration was strongest, which triggers were most likely to derail him. This knowledge allowed him to design his days around his actual capacities rather than fighting against his nature. You must develop this practice of reflective awareness. Each day, take 10 minutes to examine your focus. Not your productivity, your focus. Where were you truly present? Where were you scattered? What helped you concentrate? What pulled you away? Over time, you will develop a detailed map of your attentional landscape. You will know your vulnerabilities and your strengths. You will recognize patterns before they fully form. This knowledge is power because it allows you to intervene earlier, to catch yourself in the moment of distraction rather than after an hour has been lost. The 11th principle is the acceptance of imperfection. The Stoics did not expect perfect focus any more than they expected perfect virtue. They understood that you are human, that your attention will wander, that you will fail repeatedly. The goal is not to achieve some final state of unbreakable concentration. The goal is to practice returning to focus over and over again, to strengthen the muscle of redirection through constant use. Each time you notice distraction and return to your task, you are succeeding, not because you maintained perfect focus, but because you practiced the return. This reframing is psychologically crucial. If you believe focus means never getting distracted, you will constantly feel like a failure because distraction is inevitable. But if you understand that focus is the practice of returning, then every moment becomes an opportunity to succeed. You get distracted, you notice, you return. That is a victory. You get distracted again 30 seconds later, you notice, you return. Another victory. Over time, the intervals between distractions lengthen. The returns become faster and smoother. But this improvement happens only if you abandon the perfectionist fantasy and embrace the reality of practice. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself each morning that the day would contain frustrations, setbacks, and failures. He did not expect perfection. He expected challenges and prepared himself to meet them with equanimity. Apply this same wisdom to focus. Expect that your attention will wander. Expect that distractions will arise. Expect that you will fail to maintain focus dozens of times today. When these things happen, they will not surprise you or discourage you. They will simply be what you expected, and you will practice the return without drama. The 12th and final principle is the understanding that focus is ultimately about freedom. The Stoics did not pursue discipline for its own sake. They pursued it because discipline is what makes genuine freedom possible. When your attention is captured by every notification, every impulse, every passing anxiety, you are not free. You are enslaved. When you can direct your attention deliberately, sustain it on what matters, and recover it when it wanders, you have achieved something rare and precious: sovereignty over your own consciousness. This is the freedom that matters most, because it is the foundation for every other kind of freedom. Consider what your life would look like with truly developed focus. You sit down to work and you actually work, not in a fog of semi-attention, but with full presence. Your mind stays with the task for meaningful stretches of time. When distractions arise, you notice them quickly and return without effort. Hours pass in deep engagement rather than shallow busyness. You finish your work satisfied rather than exhausted and uncertain what you actually accomplished. You have time left for things that matter because you are not constantly redoing work that was done poorly the first time due to fractured attention. This is not fantasy. This is what developed focus looks like, and it is accessible to anyone willing to do the work. But the work is not comfortable. It requires accepting that your current level of focus is poor, that you have been operating in a fog for years, that most of your supposed productivity has been performance rather than substance. It requires facing how much time you have wasted, how many opportunities you have missed, how much of your life has been lived in distraction. This recognition is painful, but it is also liberating because it means you can change. You are not stuck with the attention you have. You can build the attention you need. The Stoic blueprint for unshakable focus is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires daily practice of attentional discipline. It requires environmental design that supports rather than undermines focus. It requires brutal honesty about what is actually urgent versus what merely feels urgent. It requires acceptance that your mind will generate noise constantly and that your job is not to stop the noise but to stop following it. It requires clarity about what you are trying to accomplish and why it matters. It requires presence in the current moment rather than displacement into past or future. It requires reflection on your attentional patterns so you can learn from your failures and successes. Most importantly, it requires understanding that focus is not a feeling you wait for, but a practice you execute regardless of how you feel. You will not always feel motivated. You will not always feel clear-minded. You will not always want to focus. But if you have built the practices, you can focus anyway. You can direct your attention deliberately even when your emotions are pulling you elsewhere. This is the ultimate freedom. Not being controlled by your feelings, not being at the mercy of your impulses, but choosing where your attention goes based on what you value. The inner noise will never stop completely. Your mind will generate distractions until the day you die. But you can learn to operate effectively despite the noise, to maintain focus even when the internal chatter is loud. This is what the Stoics achieved, and it is what they are offering you. Not a life without distraction, but a life where distraction no longer controls you. Not a mind without noise, but a mind that is not ruled by that noise. Not perfect focus, but sufficient focus to do meaningful work and live with purpose. The path forward is clear. Choose a focus practice and execute it daily. Examine your attention each evening and learn from what you find. Design your environment to support rather than sabotage your focus. Question every impulse that claims to be urgent. Return to the present moment again and again and again. Accept that you will fail constantly and practice anyway. Over time, weeks, months, years, you will notice the change. Your attention will become more stable. Your focus will become more sustainable. Your work will become more meaningful. Your life will become more yours. If you are ready to master your inner noise and build unshakable focus, then walk this path with us. Subscribe to Beyond the Logos, and together we will practice the ancient discipline that makes modern life bearable. The noise will not stop, but you can stop being ruled by it. That is the promise, and that is the practice.